I watched Margaret's handwriting dissolve in orange flames, loops and curves I'd traced with my fingertips 1,000 times, now nothing but carbon and heat. My son stood behind me, arms crossed, radiating the kind of smugness that comes from thinking you've finally put someone in their place. My jaw tightened as the smoke stung my eyes, and that's when Daniel struck. "Stop crying like a woman," he said, his voice casual cruelty wrapped in a sneer. Daniel had just crossed a line he didn't even know existed, and there would be no walking back from what came next. Before we continue, please subscribe to stay updated on our latest stories, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. I was organizing Margaret's books when Daniel walked in, using his key without knocking as usual. The familiar sound of him rummaging through my refrigerator drifted from the kitchen. "Dad, you busy?" he called out, though he was already making himself at home. "Just sorting through some things," I replied, running my fingers along the spine of Margaret's gardening journal. She'd pressed flowers between its pages, petals now brittle but still holding their colors. Daniel appeared in the doorway, beer in hand, my beer from my refrigerator. Jim Morrison mentioned you've been avoiding everyone lately. Says he tried to bring over that casserole dish his wife borrowed, but you wouldn't answer the door." I looked up from the books. "Jim Morrison talks too much, and his wife borrowed that dish 6 months ago after Margaret's funeral. Funny how grief makes people forget to return things." "Come on, Dad. He's just being neighborly." "Neighborly?" I set down the journal. "Jim Morrison is the same man who complained to the city about Margaret's roses growing an inch over the property line. The same man who called her garden an eyesore when she was dying in the hospital." Daniel's face shifted, uncomfortable. "That was different. Was it?" And his wife, Susan, so concerned about my well-being now, spent 3 years telling everyone at the grocery store that Margaret was letting herself go during chemo, real pillars of the community. "You can't hold grudges forever, Dad." "I'm not holding grudges. I'm using common sense." I turned back to the books. There's a difference between being antisocial and refusing to pretend poisonous people are suddenly saints because I'm widowed. Daniel took a long drink, his jaw working. I could feel his frustration building, not the concern of a loving son, but the irritation of someone not getting what they wanted. "You know what I think?" he said finally. "I think you're making excuses. You've gotten comfortable wallowing, and now you don't want to make any effort with anyone." Effort? The word stung. Like the effort I made last month when you needed help moving Lisa's piano, or the effort 2 weeks ago when your car broke down and you needed a ride to work for 3 days. His face flushed. "That's different. That's family. So when you need something, I'm supposed to drop everything. But when I choose not to socialize with people who treated your mother like garbage, suddenly I'm wallowing. You spend all your time up here with her old stuff." Daniel gestured wildly at Margaret's writing desk, her books, the careful way I'd preserved her corner of our bedroom. "You talk to her pictures. You keep her side of the bed made." "I keep her side of the bed made because it's my bed in my house and I'll do what brings me comfort." "It's not normal, Dad." "Normal according to who? You?" I stood up, facing him fully now. 6 months ago, you called me every other day with some crisis. Money problems, marriage problems, work problems. I dropped everything every time. Now that I'm not available to fix your life 24/7, suddenly my grief is the problem? Daniel's mouth opened and closed. He hadn't expected me to connect those dots. This isn't about me needing help. Isn't it? I moved to Margaret's writing desk, where her painted wooden box sat among her pens and stationery. "When was the last time you asked how I was doing? Really asked, not just complained about how my coping affects your convenience?" "I'm here now, aren't I?" "You're here because Jim Morrison gave you gossip, and you're annoyed that your father isn't playing the role you want him to play." Daniel set down the beer hard enough to slosh foam onto Margaret's desk. "Don't twist this around. You're obsessed, Dad. This whole shrine thing, reading her old letters over and over. Those letters are none of your business. Everything about this situation is my business. You're my father, and you're falling apart." "I'm not falling apart. I'm learning to live without the most important person in my life. There's a difference. This isn't living." Daniel grabbed at the wooden box, his control finally snapping. "This is sick, pathetic worship of a dead woman." My hand shot out to protect the box, but he was faster, angrier. His fingers closed around a handful of Margaret's letters, 26 years of love notes, birthday wishes, travel postcards. "Stop," I said quietly. But Daniel was beyond hearing, beyond reason. "You want to know what's not normal, Dad? Choosing paper over people, choosing the past over your own son." He turned toward the fireplace where the evening logs crackled peacefully, Margaret's letters clutched in his fist like weapons. "Don't you dare." But he was already throwing them into the flames. The flames devoured Margaret's handwriting with obscene eagerness. Blue ink dissolved into orange light, her careful cursive disappearing letter by letter. I watched 26 years of "I love you" and "I miss you" and "come home safe" turn to ash in seconds. Daniel stood behind me, breathing hard from his outburst, waiting for me to break, waiting for the tears, the shouting, the desperate scramble to save what couldn't be saved. He'd thrown those letters like grenades, expecting an explosion of grief that would prove his point about my mental state. Instead, I knelt by the fireplace and watched them burn. The silence stretched between us, heavy with smoke and expectation. I could feel Daniel's confusion radiating from where he stood. This wasn't the reaction he'd scripted in his head. His father was supposed to crumble now, maybe even thank him later for this tough love intervention. "Dad?" His voice had lost its edge, uncertainty creeping in. I did this for your own good." I remained motionless, watching the last of her words blacken and curl. There, Margaret's signature from her final birthday card to me, the M she always made with that little flourish, dissolving into nothing. Gone forever. "Say something," Daniel demanded, his bravado returning. "Get angry. Cry. Do something normal for once instead of just sitting there." Still, I said nothing. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in months. Daniel had just shown me exactly who he was, and somehow that knowledge felt like a weight lifting rather than settling. I stood slowly, dusting ash from my hands. Daniel stepped back instinctively, maybe finally sensing that something fundamental had shifted in the room. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing something I'd never seen there before. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. "You're scaring me, Dad. Just say something. Anything." The boy who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on ants had just incinerated his mother's love letters. And now he wanted comfort from me? Reassurance that his cruelty was justified? I walked to Margaret's writing desk and opened the drawer where she kept her fountain pens. Beautiful things, gifts from me on anniversaries and birthdays. I selected her favorite, a midnight blue Mont Blanc with her initials engraved on the cap. My fingers traced the letters, M.E.K. Margaret Eleanor Kincaid, feeling the slight indentations in the metal. "What are you doing?" Daniel's voice was higher now, nervous. I pulled out a sheet of her personal stationery, cream-colored paper with watercolor wildflowers along the border, the same paper she'd used for the letters now feeding my fireplace. I held it up to the light, examining the delicate flower pattern she'd painted herself. "Dad, you're freaking me out. Put that down and talk to me." But I was remembering something, how she'd spent hours at this very desk painting these borders on dozens of sheets, creating her own personalized stationery because store-bought never felt special enough for the people she loved. "This is insane," Daniel muttered, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling Lisa. Maybe she can talk sense into you." I looked up then, meeting his eyes for the first time since he'd burned her letters. What he saw there made him take another step back. "You won't be calling anyone," I said quietly. "Dad." "You want to know what's not normal, Daniel?" I set down the pen with deliberate care. "What's not normal is a son destroying his mother's memory because his father won't drop everything to solve his problems anymore. That's not what this was about. Wasn't it?" I stood, Margaret's stationery still in my hand. 6 months ago, when your car broke down, I drove you to work for a week. When Lisa's mother was hospitalized, I paid for your hotel so you could stay close by. When you needed a cosigner for that loan, stop. I signed without hesitation, but now that I'm not at your beck and call 24/7, suddenly my grief is pathological? My love for your mother is obsession? Daniel's face flushed red. "You're twisting everything around." "Am I?" I moved closer, and he actually flinched. "Those letters you just burned? One of them was the note your mother left for me in my lunchbox the day you were born. She wrote it while in labor between contractions because she wanted me to know how grateful she was that we were starting a family. The color drained from his face. Another was from our first anniversary when we had no money for gifts, but she spent hours writing about all the reasons she was proud to be my wife. There was the letter she sent me from the hospital during her cancer treatment, telling me not to blame myself for her illness, that loving me had been the best decision she ever made. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. I crumpled Margaret's stationery and dropped it into the fireplace, where it caught instantly. You saw papers, obstacles to your convenience. I saw 26 years of the deepest love I'll ever experience. Daniel was backing toward the door now. I was trying to help you move on. Move on? The phrase tasted bitter. You mean become available again? Stop processing my grief and start processing your needs? That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, and the sound seemed to chill him more than my silence had. Let me tell you about Fair, Daniel. Fair would be a son who honors his mother's memory instead of destroying it. Fair would be checking on his father's well-being instead of cataloging his behavior for ammunition. I walked to the mantelpiece where Margaret's photo sat, her wedding picture, radiant in white lace, looking at the camera like the future held nothing but joy. I picked it up, holding it gently. Your mother loved you unconditionally. She worried about you, prayed for you, bragged about you to anyone who'd listen, and you just burned her words because you're angry that I'm not your personal problem solver anymore. Dad, please. Please what? Please pretend this didn't happen. Please go back to dropping everything when you call. I set the photo down and turned to face him fully. Please keep enabling your selfishness while you systematically disrespect everything your mother held sacred. Daniel's eyes were wide now, finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he'd done. But it was too late for understanding. The ash of Margaret's letters was already settling into the grate, irretrievable. I can't take it back, he whispered. No, I agreed. You can't. That's when his face crumpled, not with remorse, but with the frustrated rage of a spoiled child not getting his way. The mask slipped completely, revealing the calculating selfishness underneath. Fine, he snarled. You want to waste away in this mausoleum, be my guest, but don't expect me to watch you turn into some pathetic old man who cares more about dead people than living ones. I felt the tears then, not of sadness, but of fury so pure it surprised me. Hot, angry tears for every sacrifice I'd made, every crisis I'd solved, every time I'd chosen his needs over my own. Tears for the son I thought I'd raised versus the stranger who stood in my living room surrounded by the ashes of his mother's love. Daniel saw those tears and something vicious sparked in his eyes, something that told me this had always been there, waiting. Stop crying like a woman, he said, his voice casual cruelty wrapped in a sneer. And in that moment, watching him stand there surrounded by the remains of his mother's letters, smug in his devastation, I realized something that changed everything. Daniel had just crossed a line he didn't even know existed, and there would be no walking back from what came next. The silence that followed Daniel's words hung between us like a blade. He stood there, chest heaving from his outburst, waiting for me to collapse under the weight of his cruelty. When I didn't, when I simply stared at him with a calmness that seemed to unsettle him more than tears ever could, his bravado began to crack. Get out, I said quietly. Daniel blinked as if he hadn't heard correctly. What? Get out of my house. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. This wasn't in his script either. The grieving father was supposed to beg forgiveness, not issue commands. Dad, come on, we're both upset. I'm not upset, Daniel. I'm done. Done with what? His voice pitched higher, desperation creeping in. Look, maybe I went too far with the letters, but you have to understand. I understand perfectly. I moved past him toward the front door, each step deliberate. You came into my home, destroyed irreplaceable pieces of your mother's memory, insulted my grief, and then told me to stop crying like a woman. I understand exactly who you are now. Daniel scrambled after me, his composure completely shattered. Dad, wait. Let's talk about this like adults. I was frustrated, okay? You've been impossible to reach lately, and I was worried. Worried? I turned the deadbolt with a sharp click. You were worried about me, so you burned your mother's letters? I thought it would help you see. Help me see what? That my son has no respect for his mother's memory? That he's perfectly willing to destroy anything that doesn't serve his immediate needs? I pulled the door open, cold evening air rushing in. Mission accomplished. The panic in Daniel's eyes was almost satisfying. He'd expected consequences, but not like this. Not his father, reliable, predictable, always available dad, actually standing up to him. You can't be serious. You're throwing me out over some old papers? Those old papers were love letters your mother wrote to me over 26 years of marriage, and you just called my grief feminine weakness. My voice remained steady, controlled. So yes, Daniel, I'm throwing you out. He stood in the doorway, the cold making him shiver in his thin sweater. I could see his mind working frantically, searching for the right combination of words that would reset everything back to the way it was. Back when Dad was the pushover who absorbed every insult, fixed every problem, never pushed back. This isn't you, Dad. Mom's death has changed you, and not in a good way. You're being irrational. Am I? Or am I finally being rational for the first time in years? What's that supposed to mean? I leaned against the doorframe, studying my son's face. When had I stopped seeing him clearly? When had I started making excuses for behavior that would have appalled Margaret? It means I'm done being your emotional support system while you systematically disrespect everything I hold dear. It means I'm done dropping everything to solve problems for someone who thinks so little of me. I don't think little of you. You just told me to stop crying like a woman, Daniel. After burning your mother's love letters, what exactly would you call that? His face flushed red, caught between shame and anger. I was upset. You were sitting there like a statue, not reacting, not talking. It was freaking me out. So you decided to emotionally torture me until I performed grief the way you wanted to see it? That's not. Daniel stopped, realizing how that sounded. I was trying to help. No, you were trying to control. There's a difference. The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. I could see it in his face. The moment he realized his father wasn't going to play the victim anymore, wasn't going to absorb his frustration and hand back forgiveness. Fine, he said, his voice turning cold. Maybe you're right. Maybe I shouldn't have burned the letters. But you know what, Dad? At least I'm living in the real world instead of hiding in some fantasy where Mom's still here. He stepped out onto the porch, turning back one final time. When you're ready to stop being a hermit and join the land of the living, you know where to find me. But don't expect me to keep checking on you if you're just going to treat me like the enemy. I watched him walk to his car, his shoulders rigid with wounded pride. He'd expected contrition by now, apologies, maybe even gratitude for his tough love. Instead, he was being dismissed like a stranger who'd overstayed his welcome. Oh, and Dad? Daniel called out as he opened his car door. Lisa was right. This whole shrine thing you've got going, it's not healthy. It's not normal, and Mom would be ashamed of what you've become. He slammed the car door and reversed out of my driveway with unnecessary aggression, tires squealing on the asphalt. I stood in my doorway watching his taillights disappear, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The house felt different when I closed the door behind me. Cleaner somehow, as if Daniel had taken his toxic energy with him. I walked back to the living room, where the fireplace still crackled, where the ashes of Margaret's letters still lay scattered in the grate. But I wasn't looking at the ashes anymore. I was looking at the empty beer bottle on Margaret's writing desk, at the way Daniel had helped himself to my refrigerator without asking, at the casual entitlement that had marked every interaction we'd had since Margaret died. How long had he been this person? How many years had I made excuses for his selfishness, his demands, his complete inability to consider anyone's needs but his own? And how long would it have continued if he hadn't finally shown his true face tonight? I picked up the beer bottle and carried it to the kitchen, where I poured the remaining foam down the drain. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the windows Margaret had painted with small wildflowers the spring before she got sick. Daniel thought he'd delivered the killing blow with his parting words about shame and normalcy. He had no idea that he'd just given me the greatest gift possible, absolute clarity about who he really was and who I needed to become to protect myself from him. The war was just beginning, and my son had no idea he'd already lost. 3 days passed before I made my move. 3 days of watching Daniel's car slow down as it passed my house. 3 days of letting him stew in uncertainty about what would come next. He expected retaliation, but not the kind I had in mind. Jim Morrison was in his front yard when I walked over Tuesday morning, wrestling with a garden hose that had kinked itself around his mailbox post. The same Jim Morrison who'd been gossiping about my antisocial behavior to anyone who'd listen. "Morning, Jim," I called out, my voice pleasant and neighborly. He looked up, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "Oh, hey there. Bob." He fumbled with my name like he'd forgotten it, though we'd lived across from each other for 15 years. "Looks like that hose is giving you trouble," I observed, walking closer. "Margaret used to have the same problem with ours. Cheap rubber," she always said, "gets twisted up in the heat." At the mention of Margaret's name, Jim's expression shifted uncomfortably. He remembered his complaints about her garden. All right. How he'd called it an eyesore when she was dying in the hospital. "Yeah, well, you know how it is with these things." He gave the hose another futile tug, avoiding eye contact. "Here, let me help." I knelt down and worked the kink free with practiced hands. "There we go. Should flow fine now." "Thanks," Jim said, clearly confused by this sudden neighborly gesture from the man he'd been writing off as a hermit. "No problem at all. Margaret always said neighbors should help each other out." I brushed dirt off my hands, watching Jim flinch slightly at her name. "Speaking of Margaret, Jim, I owe you an apology." His eyebrows shot up. "An apology? I know you and Susan have been trying to reach out since she passed, and I haven't been very receptive. That wasn't fair to you both." I paused, letting him process this unexpected turn. "You were just being good neighbors, and I was too wrapped up in my own grief to appreciate it." Jim's face relaxed slightly. This was more like the script he expected, the grieving widower finally coming to his senses. "Well, we understand you've been going through a tough time. That's just it, though. I've been having some family challenges lately that put everything in perspective, made me realize who my real friends are." I sighed. "Daniel came by Sunday night." Jim's eyes sharpened with interest. People like Jim Morrison lived for family drama, especially when it didn't involve their own families. "Everything all right?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. I sighed, letting a note of wariness creep into my voice. "I wish I could say yes, but I have to tell you, Jim, I'm still processing what happened. You know how Margaret kept all the letters I'd written her over the years? She had them in a special box she'd painted herself. 26 years of correspondence." "That sounds nice," Jim said, though I could see him wondering where this was going. It was. Until Daniel threw them all in the fireplace Sunday night. The words hung in the morning air like smoke. Jim's face went through several expressions at once: shock, confusion, and something that looked almost like hunger for more details. He threw them in the fire? Margaret's letters? Every single one. I shook my head slowly. Said I needed to stop living in the past, that keeping her memory alive wasn't healthy. Then when I got emotional about watching 26 years of love letters burn up, I paused, as if the memory was too painful to continue. "What happened?" Jim was leaning forward now, completely absorbed. "He told me to stop crying like a woman." Jim's mouth fell open. "He said what?" "Stop crying like a woman." Those were his exact words after destroying his mother's letters. I looked directly at Jim. "I have to tell you, I never thought I'd see the day when my own son would be so cruel about his mother's memory." "Jesus Christ," Jim muttered. "I mean, those were irreplaceable, weren't they?" "Completely irreplaceable. Margaret's handwriting, her thoughts, her feelings, all gone." I gestured helplessly. 26 years of marriage, reduced to ash because Daniel thought I was spending too much time grieving." Jim was shaking his head in obvious disgust. That's just not right, Bob. A man's got a right to grieve his wife however he needs to." I thought so too, but apparently Daniel sees things differently. I straightened up, adopting a tone of resigned acceptance. "I suppose every family has its challenges. I just never expected my challenges to involve my son destroying precious memories of his own mother." "Have you talked to him since?" "I asked him to leave that night. Haven't heard from him since." I shrugged. "Maybe it's for the best. I can't have people in my life who think so little of Margaret's memory, even if they're family." Jim was nodding vigorously now. You're absolutely right. Family or not, that kind of disrespect, especially toward a woman like Margaret. She had beautiful handwriting, he said awkwardly, clearly trying to find something safe to say about Margaret. She did, even when she was sick, even when the chemo made her hands shake, she kept writing. I looked directly at Jim, which is why Daniel's behavior Sunday night shocked me so much. Those letters meant everything to me, and he knew it. Jim was practically vibrating with righteous indignation now. You know what, Bob? You don't deserve that kind of treatment. Not from anyone, but especially not from your own son. I appreciate you saying that, Jim. It helps to know that other people understand how wrong this was. We stood there for a moment, two neighbors sharing what felt like a profound moment of connection. Jim had no idea he'd just become my unwitting accomplice. Well, I said finally, I should let you get back to your yard work. Thanks for listening, Jim. Sometimes a man just needs to talk to someone who understands. Anytime, Bob. Anytime. Jim's voice was full of newfound respect and sympathy. And if you need anything, anything at all, you just let me know. I walked back across the street, knowing that by noon, Jim would be on the phone with at least 3 neighbors. By evening, half the street would know that Daniel Kincaid had burned his dead mother's love letters and told his grieving father to stop crying like a woman. By the end of the week, the story would have traveled through Jim's network at the hardware store, Susan's book club, their church congregation, and probably half the grocery store checkout lines in town. The beauty of it was that I hadn't lied about a single detail. I'd simply shared the truth with someone who couldn't help but spread it further. Daniel had lit the match when he burned those letters. Now he was going to discover what it felt like when the flames spread beyond his control. I settled into Margaret's chair by the window and watched Jim disappear into his house, probably already reaching for his phone. Let the wildfire begin. Jim Morrison was even more efficient than I'd anticipated. By Thursday morning, Margaret's old gardening club was on my doorstep with a casserole. By Thursday afternoon, the mailman was lingering an extra few minutes to express his condolences about what happened with your son. By Friday, I had 3 more neighbors I'd barely spoken to in years knocking on my door with offers of help. Bob, Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down had said, her voice thick with sympathy, I heard about those letters. What a terrible thing to do to a man who's already grieving. I just can't imagine, echoed Pat Rodriguez from the corner house. Burning his own mother's letters like that. What gets into people? They came in waves throughout the week, each one having heard the story from someone else, each one adding their own layer of outrage. Jim Morrison's network was vast and vengeful, and Daniel had given them the perfect villain. I played my part perfectly, gracious but wounded, appreciative of their support but too dignified to say much more about the situation. I let them fill in the gaps themselves, let their imaginations run wild with what kind of man would burn his dead mother's love letters. The phone rang Friday evening while I was reading in Margaret's chair. I glanced at the caller ID and felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Hello, Lisa. Don't you hello Lisa me, she snapped, her voice tight with fury. What the hell do you think you're doing? I set down my book, one of Margaret's romance novels that I'd been slowly making my way through, and leaned back in the chair. I'm not sure what you mean. You know exactly what I mean, this whole neighborhood gossip campaign you've got going. Do you have any idea what you've done to us? I haven't done anything to you, Lisa. I had a private conversation with a neighbor about what happened Sunday night. If that conversation has spread beyond Jim Morrison, well, that's not really my responsibility, is it? Private conversation? Her voice pitched higher. You knew exactly what would happen when you told Jim Morrison anything. The man can't keep his mouth shut about what color socks he's wearing, and you gave him the juiciest piece of gossip he's had all year. I smiled, though she couldn't see it. Lisa had always been sharper than Daniel, more aware of how people really worked. She understood cause and effect in a way her husband never had. Jim seemed concerned about my well-being, I said mildly. I appreciated having someone to talk to about what I've been going through. What you've been going through. Lisa's laugh was bitter. You mean your little pity party? Daniel was trying to help you, Bob. He was worried sick about you sitting in that house all day, talking to pictures, refusing to engage with the real world. And this is how you repay him? Help? The word came out sharper than I'd intended. Is that what you call burning 26 years of his mother's love letters? Help? Those were just papers, Bob. Just old papers that were keeping you stuck in the past. Just papers. I repeated her words slowly, letting the callousness of them hang in the air. Tell me, Lisa, do you still have the love letters Daniel wrote you when you were dating? The ones from when he was deployed overseas? Silence. Because I remember Margaret mentioning how you kept those letters in a special box, how you'd read them when you missed him. Were those just papers too? That's different. How? How? How is it different? Because you're young and I'm old? Because your love is real and mine was just nostalgia? Because you're using them to avoid dealing with reality. Lisa's voice cracked slightly. Daniel did what he did because he loves you, because he's scared of losing you too. And instead of talking to him, instead of working things out like family, you've turned him into the neighborhood villain. I turned him into nothing, Lisa. Daniel's actions speak for themselves. I simply shared the truth with someone who asked. The truth? The truth is that my husband is now a pariah on his own street because you couldn't keep a family matter private. Do you know what it's like for me to walk to my car and have the neighbors stare at me like I'm married to a monster? Do you know what it's like to have my own book club whispering about my husband when I walk into the room? I could hear her breathing heavily, could picture her pacing around her kitchen the way she did when she was upset. Part of me, a very small part, almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I'm sorry you're uncomfortable, Lisa, but discomfort is a natural consequence of being associated with someone who behaves the way Daniel behaved Sunday night. Associated with someone? Her voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. He's my husband, Bob, and he's your son. This isn't some stranger we're talking about. This is family. Family doesn't burn family heirlooms out of spite. Family doesn't air dirty laundry to the entire neighborhood either. Family doesn't tell grieving fathers to stop crying like women. That stopped her. I could hear the silence stretching across the phone line, could almost feel her processing the full weight of what Daniel had done, what she'd been defending. He didn't mean it like that, she said finally, but her voice had lost its edge. How did he mean it, Lisa? Because from where I was sitting, watching my wife's letters burn while my son sneered at my grief, it seemed pretty clear how he meant it. Another long pause. When Lisa spoke again, her voice was smaller, less certain. This has gotten out of hand, Bob. Whatever happened between you and Daniel, it should stay between you and Daniel, not the whole neighborhood, not the book club, not the mailman. You're absolutely right, I agreed. It should have stayed between Daniel and me. Unfortunately, Daniel chose to make it impossible for me to trust him with anything private ever again. When someone destroys irreplaceable pieces of your history and mocks your emotional response, they forfeit the right to family discretion. So what now? Lisa asked. You're just going to let this destroy any chance of reconciliation? You're going to let neighborhood gossip poison your relationship with your only son forever? I'm not letting anything happen, Lisa. I'm simply living with the consequences of Daniel's choices, the same way he'll have to live with the consequences of his actions. You're being vindictive. I'm being honest. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like revenge. I thought about that for a moment, rolling the word around in my mind like a marble. Revenge. Such an ugly word with connotations of pettiness and spite. But what I felt wasn't petty at all. It was clean and purposeful and absolutely justified. Call it what you want, Lisa. But Daniel made his choice when he burned those letters. Now he gets to live with the world knowing who he really is. And what about me? Her voice broke slightly. What about what this is doing to me, to our kids? They have to live in this neighborhood too, Bob. They have to face these people who think their father is some kind of monster. For the first time in our conversation, I felt a flicker of genuine regret. Lisa's children, my grandchildren, hadn't asked for any of this. They were innocent casualties in a war their father had started, but that wasn't my fault either. Then I suggest you talk to your husband about making amends, I said quietly. Because this conversation isn't going away, Lisa, not until Daniel acknowledges what he did and finds a way to make it right. And if he doesn't, then he doesn't. but I won't be the one pretending it never happened. The line went quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was resigned and tired. You're not the man I thought you were, Bob. You're right, I agreed. I'm not. I'm not the pushover who'd let my son destroy my most precious possessions and then pretend it was for my own good. I'm not the grieving widower who'd smile and nod while being told how to mourn properly. I'm someone Daniel never expected to meet. A father who won't be taken advantage of anymore. Lisa hung up without saying goodbye. Saturday afternoon, I was reading one of Margaret's romance novels when I heard the familiar sound of Daniel's car in my driveway. But this time, there were 2 car doors slamming instead of one. Through the window, I watched Daniel and Lisa walk up my front path, their faces set with grim determination. They didn't knock. Daniel still had his key. Dad, we need to talk, Daniel announced as they walked into my living room like they owned it. Lisa stood beside him, her arms crossed, radiating barely controlled anger. I closed Margaret's book carefully, marking my place with the bookmark she'd embroidered years ago. By all means, come in. Make yourselves at home. Cut the sarcasm, Lisa snapped. Do you have any idea what you've done? The entire neighborhood thinks Daniel is some kind of monster thanks to your little gossip session. I looked at her calmly, then at Daniel, who was standing slightly behind his wife like she was his shield. I had a conversation with a neighbor who asked how I was doing. I told him the truth. The truth? Lisa's voice pitched higher. You turned a private family matter into neighborhood entertainment. Mrs. Patterson won't even look at me at the grocery store anymore. Our kids are asking why people whisper when they see us. Lisa, Daniel started, but she cut him off. No, Daniel, I'm tired of handling this delicately. Your father has been acting like a vindictive teenager, and it stops now. She turned back to me, her eyes flashing. You need to go door to door and tell everyone that you exaggerated, that you were overwrought with grief, that Daniel was just trying to help. Lisa, that's enough. Daniel's voice was firm, surprising both of us. He's not going to do that. She whipped around to face him. What? He's not going to lie for me. I burned the letters. I said what I said. If people think I'm an asshole because of it, that's on me, not him. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the angle he was working. But there was something different in his posture, something that looked almost like resignation. Lisa stared at her husband in disbelief. Are you seriously taking his side right now? I'm not taking anyone's side. I'm just tired of pretending this didn't happen the way it happened. So what now? Lisa demanded. We just let our reputation get destroyed because you had a moment of poor judgment? Daniel was quiet for a long moment, looking around the room, at Margaret's chair where I sat, at her writing desk, at the fireplace where her letters had burned. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than I'd heard it in years. Maybe it wasn't just a moment, Lisa. Maybe I've been having poor judgment for a while now. I watched this exchange with growing interest. Something was shifting in the dynamic between them, some crack in their united front that hadn't been there before. What's that supposed to mean? Lisa asked. Daniel looked at me directly for the first time since entering the room. It means maybe Dad has a point. Maybe I have been treating him like my personal problem solver instead of my father. Lisa's mouth fell open. This clearly wasn't the script they'd rehearsed on the drive over. Daniel, you're being ridiculous. You were trying to help him move on, to get him engaging with life again instead of wallowing. Was I? Daniel interrupted. Or was I just pissed off that he wasn't available to fix my problems anymore? The question hung in the air like smoke. I remained silent, letting them work through this themselves, watching years of carefully constructed justifications crumble in real time. You can't be serious, Lisa said, but her voice had lost its certainty. When's the last time I called Dad just to see how he was doing? Daniel asked her. Not because I needed something, not because you reminded me to, just because I wanted to talk to him? Lisa opened her mouth, then closed it. The answer was obvious to all of us. That's what I thought. Daniel sat down heavily in the chair across from me, the same chair he'd occupied the night he burned the letters. Dad, I came here to demand that you fix this mess, but sitting here now, I don't think I have the right to demand anything from you anymore. I set Margaret's book aside and leaned forward slightly. Go on. You said something the other night about how when you needed help, I was there. When my car broke down, when Lisa's mother was in the hospital, when I needed a cosigner. Daniel's voice got quieter. You were always there, and I took that for granted. Daniel, Lisa started, but he held up a hand. No, let me finish. I took it for granted that Dad would always be my safety net, would always drop everything to help me figure out my life. And when Mom died and when he needed to grieve, when he needed space to process losing the most important person in his world, I got angry because he wasn't paying attention to me anymore. I felt something loosen in my chest, some knot of anger I'd been carrying for months. That's why I burned the letters, Daniel continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Not because I thought it would help him heal, because I was furious that he was more focused on her memory than on solving my problems. Lisa was staring at her husband like she'd never seen him before. Daniel, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in his eyes in years. Genuine remorse. I destroyed something irreplaceable because I was jealous of a dead woman. And then when you didn't react the way I wanted, when you didn't break down and beg me to help you pull yourself together, I said the cruelest thing I could think of. The room was absolutely silent, except for the ticking of Margaret's grandmother clock in the corner. You know what the worst part is? Daniel asked. Mom would have been disgusted with me. Not disappointed, not sad, disgusted. She raised me better than that, and I threw it all away because I couldn't stand not being the center of attention for 5 minutes. I studied my son's face, searching for signs that this was another manipulation, another angle. But there was something raw and broken in his expression that I'd never seen before. You want to know something about grief, Daniel? I said finally. When a man loses his wife, when he loses the person who knew him better than anyone else in the world, he needs to go inside himself for a while. He needs to remember who he was with her and figure out who he's going to be without her. That takes time. It takes silence. It takes space. Daniel nodded slowly. But apparently, you and Lisa didn't need the new man who might emerge from that process. You needed the old one, the one who would prioritize your convenience over his own healing, who would pretend to be fine so you wouldn't have to deal with the mess of real grief. That's not, Lisa started, but I continued. The man who came out of that process was always going to be different, Daniel. Stronger, maybe. More selective about how he spends his energy. Less willing to sacrifice his own needs for everyone else's comfort. But you didn't want that man. You wanted the old pushover back. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. So what now, Dad? Where do we go from here? I looked at my son, really looked at him for the first time in months. The entitled, demanding man who'd burned Margaret's letters was still there, but so was something else. Something that looked like the boy I'd raised, the one who used to cry when he accidentally stepped on ants. I don't know, Daniel. That depends on who you want to be moving forward. I want to be better, he said quietly. I want to be the son Mom thought she raised. Then you have work to do, I replied. And it starts with understanding that you can't undo what you did. Those letters are gone forever. That trust is broken. The question is whether you're willing to build something new from what's left. Lisa looked between us, her earlier anger replaced by something that looked almost like fear. What about the neighborhood situation? People are still going to. Let them, Daniel said, cutting her off. Dad told the truth. I did what he said I did. If people think less of me because of it, maybe that's what I deserve. Daniel, Lisa, I burned my mother's love letters and told my grieving father to stop crying like a woman. What exactly are you expecting me to defend here? She stared at him for a moment, then sank into the remaining chair, looking defeated. The man you married was selfish and entitled, I said to her, not unkindly. He's acknowledging that now. The question is whether you can love the man he might become if he does the work to change. Lisa looked at me with something that might have been respect. And what about you, Bob? Can you forgive him? I thought about that question, rolling it around in my mind like a marble. Forgiveness. Such a loaded word with implications of absolution and return to the way things were. I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm willing to see who he becomes if he's serious about changing. Daniel nodded slowly. That's more than I deserve. Yes, I agreed. It is. Don't waste it. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. And when you're ready for the next story, just click the box on the left. Thanks for watching.